at the deep, dark recesses of the moral sewer that is neoliberal capitalism, right? Right at the absolute dregs in the rat-infested, feces-ridden, absolute, like, the right at the bottom of the moral sewer of capitalism is the gambling industry. I hate, as someone who was previously a gambling addict, I fucking despise it. Maybe I am entirely, therefore, biased in my opinion of these people, but I hate the gambling industry so much so that during the scandal in which Mohammed Amir and other members of the Pakistan national cricket team got outed as wanting to defraud the gambling industry using spot fixing, I supported them because I wanted the gambling industry to lose, because I absolutely despise the gambling industry. They're genuinely awful. They are parasitic leeches who essentially manipulate the most vulnerable people in society into addictions. They ruin people's lives. They ruin families' lives, right? They ruin huge numbers of people's lives wholly in the sake of profit. And they use the most dastardly tricks to do it. And it seeps into what I find to be every single facet of our daily lives, right? So obviously there's places like casinos and things like poker, what have you, all these kind of games and things like that. But then you think about how the gambling industry will infect things like, I played Magic the Gathering, for example. What's what the MTG stands for? I played a lot of Magic the Gathering. That's a lot of the time. That's just gambling your money on opening the expensive cards. We let kids do that shit. We let kids just spend their money gambling for cards and shit like that. That's not to mention the ways in which the games will get you to gamble with their in-game currency and will use their own in-game currency as a way of skirting around gambling regulations. Jim Sterling, or I guess that's the channel, but obviously Steph Sterling is the name that they're using currently, has gone into great detail in the kind of the predatory ways in which these games companies will use and try and circumvent anti-gambling laws, and the ways in which they will market and use psychological techniques to hook in people, the whales they call, to spend huge amounts of money. And it's not just the things like that you get with loot boxes. It's FIFA Ultimate Team. It's everywhere. It's the part of the live service model to try and extract as much money from vulnerable people as possible. So I have very little about the gambling industry that I like. But because it's an industry that's obviously it's been around since the dawn of time, one of the oldest industries in the world, and because of the ways in which that it can seriously damage people, and the ways in which the vulnerable people are at huge risk of this, I would know, as someone who was a gambling addict not a decade ago, for example, I know the kind of hooks that these psychological hooks, they will use and they'll get into you. Why do you think that the fruit machines is what I was caught in by? Why they have all of the flashing lights and the funny patterns to try and get you drawn into these things? It's really toxic in the way that they do that. If you think about, I don't know if anyone follows the channel Friendly Geordies, but he's done a lot of work uncovering some of the sick shit that the gambling industry does, or the pokies that they call them in Australia does, so much so that they are one of the suspects in people who hired hitmen to burn his house down. This is how corrupt and incredibly base the gambling industry is. Now, because it's so highly regulated, they do as much as they can to try and get into the pockets of the government to ensure that they are as unregulated as possible, because the regulations are specifically there to stop them from making money. Because the only barrier between them making as much money as possible is A, regulation, and B, their own the people who they essentially predate off of kill themselves, basically. Those are the two metrics as to the amount of profit of the gambling industry, because they can make money off whales forever. That's the whole point of an addiction. You can't stop. And the ways in which that they will get into the pockets of government officials is through slightly shady means. And we now have a gigantic expose on how they do this, because there was a sting investigation by the Times, no less, into MP Scott Benton. Actually, it was into a bunch of different MPs, but Scott Benton was the one who fell for the trap. And so he's here caught on camera, exposing all of the ways in which the gambling industry will try and capture politicians for their own personal gain. There's some hidden camera footage here that we're going to be able to watch and react to. So let's have a look.
Votes in House Commons 2 or 3 times a day. The minister has to pass you, and then you've got 10 minutes while you walk around to the next vote to have his ear. There's written questions as well, where we can table things on the public record and get an instant response within 5 working days. And thirdly, we have access to papers and information which PR companies wouldn't.
The government is carrying out a major review of gambling laws for the first time since 2005. It is considering whether to bring in tougher regulations.
Literally, it's interesting you should say that, Dwarfy. When we were watching Deputy PMQs last week, Scott Benton asked a question, and I just literally took one look at him, and I said to chat, this guy looks like a massive wanker. Well, turns out I am an excellent judge of character based upon how somebody looks when they're asking a question in the House of Commons.
Which could hit operators' profits. The Times went undercover to investigate allegations that the gambling industry has been securing support from MPs in exchange for financial reward.
The gambling company William Hill was a soldier in the Easter Rising. After that rising, he set up shops and became rich. Huh, interesting. What I also find interesting, how the Times have been doing some actual investigative journalism at this point. They've done a lot of stuff exposing a lot of this shit that's been going on. It's really funny how all of these stories about how the internal machinations of Westminster are incredibly corrupt miraculously happened just after we lost genuine opposition in the Commons. Don't you find that weird? You find that a bit weird? As long now there's no hope of change. Suddenly all these papers are coming out with all of these stories about how not just the Conservative Party, but the entirety of Westminster is incredibly corrupt and scandalous. A really weird coincidence that. I mean, it could also be the fact that they're just not scared by Keir Starmer anymore. Or they're scared by Keir Starmer's ability to try and win the election. They want the Tories to win at basically any cost. And the cost is going to have to be, as far as they're concerned, trying to delegitimise Westminster entirely, right? Getting people to the position where they think that everybody's bad and there's nothing you can do to change it, and that you have to go feeding this kind of right-wing populism. Although, I doubt that they would do that, because I say that all the time. I say that everybody is bad, but I say everybody's bad because they're all right-wing, not because they're all corrupt, right? But, story for another time, probably.
This is in spite of strict rules which prevent MPs from carrying out paid lobbying or advising on how to influence Parliament in exchange for pay, or the expectation of pay. To test this, we set up a fake company and approached several MPs saying we were looking to hire a politician as a paid expert advisor. We said the fund had been set up by a wealthy Indian businessman who was looking to make investments in the betting and gaming.
Yeah, I think a bunch of the Tories have been, as stretchy Big L, a lot of the Tories have been much more susceptible for this kind of stuff, because they know that basically their job in the Commons is basically at an end come the next elections. They're going to have to get themselves a separate set of, a second income stream pretty pronto.
Sector in the UK. One, Scott Benton, agreed to meet reporters at a central London hotel in early March.
Nice to meet you.
After introductions, the MP tells us
this guy's done promos for the gambling industry already. This guy's been in the thick of this kind of stuff previously, so it's not any kind of surprise as far as I'm concerned that he was the person who greenlit this kind of stuff.
But although the gambling industry's lobbying had been relatively successful, the contents of the review were once again up in the air with the appointment of a new culture secretary, Lucy Fraser.
Now we've got a new secretary of state. I spoke to her yesterday. The alarm bells were ringing, to tell you the truth, on 2 different levels. I don't think she knows. I don't think she's got.
So did Tom Watson. So indeed, did Sir Keith Starmer. Guess who donated to Keir Starmer's leadership campaign? It was the founder of Bet365.
Grasp of the detail of the reform she should have at this stage. And then B, not only did she fail to have a grasp of finer points, but her general directions seem to be taking it back to pre-Rishi Sunak days, which was when we were looking at affordability proposals potentially being levied upon everybody
Those are our biggest
who
concern.
has an online account. Essentially, the industry needs to start its lobbying process once again.
We asked Benton what he could offer the company as an MP that a conventional lobbying or PR outfit couldn't. MPs are not allowed to approach ministers or ask parliamentary questions in order to benefit a company which is giving them, or proposing to give them, a financial reward.
That's a very good question. Probably the direct ear of a minister who's actually going to make these decisions. So, two different, I'll be entirely honest, I'll speak as a non-politician, having worked in PR in the past. PR agencies are absolutely great. They have established set of contacts, they know how to work the room, etc. The one thing they don't have is direct access to a government minister. We vote in House Commons 2 or 3 times a day. We'll be voting later. You will literally stand at the beginning, at the entrance to the voting lobby, and if you wait there for 5 minutes, the minister has to pass you, and then you've got 10 minutes while you walk around to the next vote to have his ear. We can obviously put parliamentary questions on the table, so PCMS questions on Thursday, so we can ask things in a direct manner in public to see if the reaction we get is consistent with what we get in.
And there you go, just immediately exposed there, just saying, yeah, literally we can ask questions in Parliament for you. Just, yeah, absolutely bang to rights, caught in what looks like 360p.
Private, which isn't always the case. There's written questions as well, where we can table things on the public record and get an instant response within 5 working days.
The sad part, right, is that we could have done that. We could have rooted this out ages ago. This could have been something that we completely extricated from the entirety of Westminster life. We could have done this decades ago. Remember Cash for Questions, Cash for Honours, Expenses Scandal, all this kind of slimy shit that went on behind the scenes during the Blair years, right? We could have nixed this ages ago. This could have been nixed forever. But no, the Lib Dems, the Tories, Labour, they're all in on it. They refused to move. But remember, during the Expenses Scandal, where they refused to actually properly scrutinise and question the other parties in these cases because they're all fucking guilty of it. Obviously, the Tories are worse than everybody else. But clearly every party is at least somewhat to blame for these kind of things. And we could have put our foot down and actually kind of stamped this shit out. But that's not in the interests of the media, and it's definitely not in the interests of the politicians.
On any question whatsoever, which obviously nobody else outside the political realm can.
He then shows us a written question he has recently tabled, he says, on behalf of a company.
Oh, there we go. It was 2 weeks ago, 17th of February. So there's a written question. So that was sent in on behalf of one business, essentially.
Right, where am I looking at the top here?
This one here. The Office of Product Safety and Standards conduct an investigation into regulation.
Like, it's frustrating because, like, not only is he evil, he's also fucking stupid. Where he's literally just like, look, here is this evidence of me breaking the parliamentary rules. There you go. There's the evidence. What an idiot. What a clown. We need professional standards like doctors. If you're found guilty of this shit, disbarred for life. I mean, Matt Zarb-Cousin was making this point on Twitter. Now, Matt Zarb-Cousin is an ex-advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, who now works as a campaigner to try and put more regulations on the gambling industry in general. A zero-tolerance approach to corruption would see Scott Benton barred from standing as a Conservative candidate ever again. That he can remain as an MP after these revelations illustrates how regulations around parliamentary standards are inadequate. I mean, which we saw already, given the Boris Johnson debacle, how the hoops that you have to go through to be able to actually let these people see any consequences for any of the actions they fucking engage in, right? It only stands to reason that something like this would not actually result in any real consequences outside of what his own party internally wants to do with him. Like, they've withdrawn the RIP already, which is baseline shit we should expect for this kind of stuff. But he'll still be in the Commons, being able to do this shit. Over and over again, because he won't get removed to Biden as an MP until the next election. By the time that some kind of privileges committee will have a look at this, but how long has it taken to get a privileges committee for Boris Johnson done, and how long they've deliberated on it to try and recommend a suspension of 10 days? The hoops you have to jump through to get these people the fuck out of the Commons is impossible. It's far, far, far too high, and this shit it's not even something that requires investigation. It's just obvious and blatant corruption in front of your very eyes, caught in 4K. Gone, instant. Fuck it. Get rid of it. Let's be honest, he only didn't take the job because 2 to 4K a month is tiny for the gambling industry. Well, true, yeah, they've got there's some deep pockets. What you have here is an MP saying on record the hospitality he has received from the gambling lobby has been artificially deflated in value, so as to avoid having to declare it on the Register of Interests. This implicates not Scott Benton, but also the gambling industry. How many tens of thousands of pounds worth of hospitality has gone undeclared as a result of this sleight of hand? What's been the quid pro quo? How many MPs have advocated on behalf of the gambling industry as a result of it during what's supposed to be an evidence-led review? I mean, Matt Sarkazan also posted this thing, a clip of different MPs, I think it was, trying to justify this kind of stuff in a committee meeting. Gambling industry increased spending on MPs tenfold in 5 years. Shows just how good the money is, right? Let's be clear, right? Let's be fully fucking clear about this kind of stuff. Again, I say this every time this kind of shit happens, but I'm gonna repeat it for posterity. Firms under capitalism, right? I'm not a fan of capitalism, but I seem to understand it a lot better than other people do, especially some fucking liberals, right? I'm no capitalism stan. Under capitalism, firms it is the fiduciary responsibility of firms to maximize profits for their shareholders, right? The shareholders appoint a board of directors, including a CEO, who oversee management of the company to engage in the maximization of revenue and of dividends to shareholders, right? And maximizing shareholder value too. That's their singular job. If they stop doing that, they will lose their job. That's how capitalism functions under shareholder capitalism specifically. If you do not generate value for shareholders, you are gone. If you do not act in the best interests of shareholders, you are gone. That is how the system works, right? People are just saying, oh, this is immoral behavior by the companies. And it's not immoral behavior, it's amoral behavior. This company doesn't care about whether there is a moral consideration here. They don't understand how moral considerations work because they only have one job, and that's to make the line go up. That's to make the number on the spreadsheet as high as possible. And they would not be giving money to MPs if they were not going to be getting some kind of money in return from that. It's clearly some kind of investment. Companies don't get rich by giving away loads of money. They get rich by taking money away from people. So the money that's being handed to these MPs to essentially engage in paid lobbying on behalf of the most grotesque industry in the fucking country, as far as I'm concerned at the very least, is being funded explicitly by the money they're taking away by predating on incredibly vulnerable people. Because if they weren't getting returns on the investment they're making in MPs, they would be making a loss on that money, and the people who made those decisions would lose their fucking jobs, because that's how capitalism works. Why we should be surprised by this, or try and find is there some secret reason? Do we think they're getting some lobbying benefit out of this? What I wonder what all the spending is. If they were spending the money and not making money out of it, they would not be doing it. It's a super fucking simple concept, right? You do not give money to MPs if you do not expect to make more money in the long run by doing so. Because again, as I said before, they have to make sure that regulation is minimized as much as possible, because regulation is literally the only thing standing in their way between ruining huge amounts of addicts' lives. It's the only thing is the regulation. That's the tiny little fucking cigarette paper that is holding back the tide of gigantic amounts of gambling debt. Because it's going to happen more often, right? Happened during the pandemic. These kind of things happen more often. And it's going to happen more now the cost of living's here, and people are desperate to try and escape the issues that we have from the widespread poverty that's going to be caused by the cost of living crisis. And gambling companies are going to be the ones to pick up the slack and try and make all that money. Ah, yes, but what if it was just crony capitalism, not good capitalism? Yes. The real problem here is not the gambling companies. It's actually the government. The existence of a libertarian would genuinely tell you that with a straight face. If we just got rid of the government, then these people wouldn't be able to lobby on behalf of the gambling industry. When, the only reason why there's regulations on this shit in the first place is because of the literal fucking government. The government is the only thing giving us the regulation that stops the gambling industry from being completely profligate predators on incredibly vulnerable people. Also, the people who own and profit off the gambling industry will say, don't gamble, buy avocado toast, save money. Well, literally, exactly. It's the only thing that stops this shit is by having huge amounts of government regulation in place. Why do you think that you see pictures of diseased lungs on on the packets of cigarettes, because the cigarette and the smoking industry, they do literally all the same shit that the gambling industry does. Try and get themselves into the pockets of the most unscrupulous MPs and use that as a position to get themselves favourable business terms with regards to the theoretical government regulation. Because our country is essentially just run entirely for the needs of incredibly rich people who have deep pockets to fill the incredibly deep and empty pockets of the corrupt and dodgy MPs who enable them. It's incredible, absolutely incredible.
For repeated breaches of the regulator's code, and within 5 days you get a full answer.
Great.
In response to that answer as well, you get a private note from the minister, which sometimes tells you information he couldn't put in the public domain.
We did the game stuff earlier on, my revenge, but it's essentially exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. In the reason why these games companies will almost certainly do the same shit these gambling companies do, because they know, when the game developers and the game publishers rather, they know already, they know full well the same kind of legislation that you get in Germany to stop people gambling with, the internal currency of the video game. It's exactly the same kind of regulation that is in the pipeline in other countries to try and stem the flow of the predatory nature of video game monetization and the loot boxes and essentially, gambling for kids that video games engage in the most sickening and cynical way possible. And this is exactly the same shit that we got with remember when the people who ran slots were paying Twitch stars like gigantic sums of money to play slots on stream so that they could rig the game so these people won, to try and essentially get that kind of emotional hook into the viewers of those streams, to try and get them to go on the slot websites to try and convince them that they would be the winners based upon the emotional reaction they had to their favourite streamer winning money. And they paid all of that money knowing that they would make that money back in revenue from all of the additional new customers they got from the people who are watching those streams in the first place. So those people who subscribe to those streamers are then probably going to go out, play those slots on those online gambling websites, and then using their own money, which will then go back to pay more for contracts to these people doing the dodgy slot machine games on Twitch. Mooncat does indeed have an excellent video on that kind of stuff. Mooncat and Jim Sterling is the name of the channel on YouTube that you need to go and actually pay attention to stuff, because they've covered it over and over and over again. It's well worth continue looking back on. And regulation is going to stop these people. So yeah, fucking ANCAPs are idiots. Regulation is super fucking important, right? This idea that we're going to have a bonfire of deregulation, when this regulation like this is the one thing stopping incredibly vulnerable people from having their lives ruined by the absolute fucking scum-sucking shit that pass for boards of directors of companies these days. I say these days, I mean forever, because that's how capitalism works.
You don't need to say with that, it wouldn't be public that we've asked you to do that. It would you just get the response. And
I'd have to declare an interest.
Right, okay.
But I wouldn't have to declare what the interest is.
Right.
So as long as I've gone on the public record and say I'm declaring an interest because I may be connected to an operator in the gaming world who I've had contact with in the past.
Benton suggests other ways in which he could help TAR partners to push for policy changes that would benefit their interests. MPs are prohibited from advising companies on how to influence Parliament.
Meeting with advisors, I think, is urgent. Meeting with the minister himself, Stuart or Lucy, would be absolutely fantastic. Although probably less likely than meeting Stuart, who's the direct minister responsible. Tabling some written questions to try and flesh out the government's intentions on X, Y, and Z, and then probably writing something more formal and having me sit down with the minister and go through it.
And again, do you want to point out here, obviously the Tories are the worst for this stuff, but Labour are almost as bad, right? Neil Coyle's been, somebody who's had his pockets being filled by people from the gambling industry as well. I mean, also, let's have a look, just have a look here. Here is the middle of a debate around gambling harm from 2020, and here's an absolute fucking stack of MPs, including friend of the show Jonathan Gullis, waxing lyrical about how amazing the gambling industry is. Let's watch.
Yes, of course. I'm not against deposit limits, neither are Bet3, and we have lower levels for young people and so on and so forth.
Refers to a briefing that I was reading, Ms Rees. Indeed, I was reading a briefing that was presented to the Minister when he came on his visit.
Clean this up. Please contact your MP.
Apologise to all members for that.
Don't know why it's not playing the video there, but you get the picture, right? This is a very large group of MPs that can actually find the point at which you get to see them. Don't know why why the video is so screwed up on my end, but there we go.
If I earn £1 billion, I'll make sure I pay my tax as well.
Well,
Clock ticking down on me. I was unable and forgot to register my. I'll draw members' attention to my register of interest for the £540 worth of 4 match tickets to Stoke City versus Fulham at the Bet365 Stadium in January. I do apologise to all members for that.
I would like to congratulate Bet365. They've indeed mobilised speakers well today. I hope that their protection of vulnerable customers is as tenacious as their ability to get MPs to come and speak on their behalf in a Westminster Hall debate.
A thorough...
There you go. And at least you can see that shit. There's loads of them there. Loads of them there. Because they're all fucking in the pocket of this gigantic industry that has to, for its own bottom line, rely on the MPs that they can buy to fight for their corner with regards to nixing potential anti-gambling regulation.
Line by line. I've supported other colleagues' particular asks in meetings when they've spoken to company X, Y and Z, and I'm sure they would return the favour as well.
We ask about the white paper, which is due imminently. This policy document is likely to contain market-sensitive information, but Benton says he is willing to leak a copy before it is made public.
Would it be realistic to get advance sight of the white paper, for example, when it's sort of finally decided, or anything on those lines?
Probably. That would only be a number of days, so...
Okay, so that would still be useful for investment?
Yeah, for a bit of account side.
Absolutely, I could guarantee you would get that within 48 hours of publication, for example.
Before publication?
Yeah, I would just make a song and dance and making sure that happens.
Great.
As the meeting wraps up, the conversation turns to how much he would be paid if hired to do around 2 days' work a month.
What sort of, would you have a figure in mind? What sort of compensation would you be looking for?
I'll leave that to you. I think that would be remiss of me to give.
I mean, we were thinking probably in the range of £2,000 to £4,000.
I'm surprised he's waiting for the standards, any kind of standards committee to have any investigation to this. If it was me, I'd fucking resign in shame. Obviously, it wouldn't be me because I wouldn't do this. But, you know, if I was in this position right now, I absolutely would resign in shame. 100%. Give me the by-election, fuck it. You know, I would want to be as low as possible moving forward if I was in Scott Benton's position. How unlucky do you have to be the guy who gets caught in the corruption scandal and your name is literally bent? Oh, it's true, yeah. If you had any shame, you wouldn't be a Tory in the first place.
Yes, I think yes.
During the 70-minute meeting, Benton had repeatedly outlined how he was willing to take actions which would break parliamentary rules. We told him we were due to fly to India a few weeks later and would let him know whether we planned to hire him.
I met with 2 individuals claiming to represent the company to find out what this role entailed. After the meeting, I was asked to follow my CV and about some personal details. I did not do so as I was concerned with what was being asked of me was not within the parliamentary rules. If it was, then why didn't you say it at the fucking time when you were asked? Jesus Christ. What a piece of shit. What a gigantic piece of shit. But there you go. That's just how capitalism works. Isn't capitalism fun? Because this is the profit motive. Again, do you want to make it doubly clear here that this is not immoral behaviour, this is amoral behaviour. And they would not be spending this money where they're not going to make returns on it. Think about where the profits are going to come from. And that should be your thought whenever any large corporation or rich person spends a bunch of money. It's just they're in their position that they are by taking money away from people, not giving money to people. So not just follow the money, follow where the money's going as well.